The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse creaked as they swung open. Tyler stepped inside, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished marble floor. The sound echoed through the grand hallway, making him feel smaller than he already did. At 19 years old, he had never imagined he would be walking into a place like this as a defendant. Tyler pulled at his collar nervously. The white button-down shirt was borrowed from his older brother, and it was a size too big. His mom had ironed it 3 times that morning, trying to make sure he looked presentable. She had cried when he left the house, whispering prayers under her breath. Tyler wished he could have said something to comfort her, but honestly, he was terrified too. The courthouse was nothing like what he had expected. Everything was massive and intimidating. Tall columns stretched up to a ceiling, painted with scenes he didn't recognize. Lawyers in expensive suits walked past him, their briefcases clicking against their legs as they moved with purpose. Tyler felt like he was wearing a costume to a party where he didn't belong. A security guard pointed him toward the elevator. "Third floor, courtroom B," the man said without really looking at him. Tyler nodded and pressed the button, watching the numbers light up as he rose higher into the building. With each floor, his stomach dropped a little more. The charges against him were serious. Aggravated assault. The words still didn't feel real when he said them in his head. 3 months ago, Tyler had been working construction, saving money for community college and helping his mom pay the bills. Now he was facing the possibility of years in prison for something he didn't do. It all started on a Friday night in downtown. Tyler had been walking home from his job at the construction site when he heard shouting from an alley. Being the kind of person who couldn't ignore someone in trouble, he had gone to check it out. That decision changed everything. When Tyler found the source of the noise, he saw a young man lying on the ground, clearly hurt. The guy was well-dressed, probably around Tyler's age, and he was bleeding from his arm. Tyler rushed over to help, but before he could even ask what happened, police sirens were wailing in the distance. The injured man, who Tyler later learned was named Blake Morrison, pointed at him when the officers arrived. "That's him," Blake had said through gritted teeth. "He attacked me." Tyler was so shocked he couldn't even speak at first. By the time he found his voice to protest, the handcuffs were already clicking around his wrists. Blake Morrison wasn't just anyone. His father was Robert Morrison, a city council member who had been in the news lately for his tough stance on crime. The story hit the local papers within hours. Council member's son attacked by local youth. Tyler's picture was plastered on the front page, making him look guilty before he ever stepped foot in a courtroom. What made everything worse was that Tyler had no alibi. He had been walking alone, and the construction site had closed for the day. There were no witnesses to back up his story that he had only been trying to help. The security cameras in the area were old and grainy, showing figures but not clear enough to prove what really happened. Tyler's family scraped together what little money they had to hire a lawyer, but they couldn't afford much. The attorney they ended up with, Mr. Peterson, seemed overwhelmed and distracted. During their first meeting, which lasted only 20 minutes, Peterson barely looked up from his other case files. "This is going to be tough," Peterson had told him bluntly. "The victim is credible, well-connected. You don't have much of a record, which helps, but this is still an uphill battle." Tyler left that meeting feeling more hopeless than ever, but Tyler wasn't the type to give up easily. Growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce had taught him to fight for everything he got. While his friends were out having fun, Tyler had always been working or studying. He had dreams of becoming an engineer someday, and he wasn't going to let this destroy everything he had worked for. So Tyler started doing something that surprised everyone, including himself. He began studying law. Every evening after work, instead of going home to collapse on the couch like he used to, Tyler walked to the public library. The building was old and quiet, with tall shelves that reached toward the ceiling and creaky wooden chairs that had seen better days. At first, the legal books were like reading a foreign language. The sentences were long and filled with words Tyler had never heard before. But he was determined. He started with basic legal guides, the kind written for regular people who wanted to understand their rights. Slowly, he worked his way up to more complex materials. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, noticed Tyler's dedication after the first few weeks. She would save certain books for him, and even showed him how to access legal databases on the library computers. "You're really serious about this," she said one evening as Tyler was packing up his notes. Tyler just nodded. He didn't tell her why he was studying so hard. He was too embarrassed to admit he was facing criminal charges. As the weeks passed, Tyler's understanding of the law grew. He learned about evidence rules, witness testimony, and court procedures. He read case studies of similar situations and began to understand how the legal system actually worked, not just how it appeared on television shows. What shocked Tyler most was how many mistakes he could see in his own case, even as someone with no formal legal training. The police report had inconsistencies. The medical records seemed incomplete. The witness statements didn't quite match up. But when Tyler brought these concerns to Peterson, the lawyer just shrugged. "Look, kid," Peterson said during one of their brief meetings, "I've got 30 other cases right now. Your best bet is to take a plea deal and minimize the damage. Fighting this thing could backfire badly." Tyler felt his heart sink. A plea deal meant admitting guilt for something he didn't do. It meant having a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life. It meant his dreams of college and a better future would disappear. That night, Tyler sat in his small bedroom, surrounded by law books he had checked out from the library. His mom knocked on the door and came in with a cup of tea. She sat on the edge of his bed and looked at all the books scattered around. "You know," she said quietly, "your father would be proud of how hard you're working." Tyler's dad had died when he was 12, and his mom rarely talked about him. He always said that knowledge was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you. As Tyler looked at those books that night, he realized something important. Maybe Peterson was right that this was an uphill battle. Maybe the odds were stacked against him. But Tyler had spent his whole life fighting uphill battles, and he wasn't about to stop now. The trial was set to begin in 2 weeks. Tyler made a decision that would change everything. The morning of the trial arrived faster than Tyler had hoped. He sat in the defendant's chair, feeling the weight of every eye in the packed courtroom. The gallery was full of people who had come to watch what the local newspaper had called the trial of the year. Most of them seemed to have already made up their minds about his guilt. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom with the authority of someone who had been making life-changing decisions for decades. She was a tall woman with graying hair pulled back severely, and when she looked at Tyler, he felt like she could see right through him. The bailiff called the court to order, and Tyler's hands began to shake slightly. District Attorney Williams stood up to give his opening statement. He was everything Tyler wasn't: polished, confident, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than Tyler made in 3 months. When he spoke, his voice filled the courtroom with the kind of authority that comes from years of winning cases. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Williams began, "this case is about a young man who made a terrible choice. Tyler Chen thought he could solve his problems with violence, and an innocent person paid the price." Tyler winced at hearing his name spoken like that, as if he were already guilty. Williams painted a picture of Tyler as someone who had grown up on the wrong side of town, someone who had been heading for trouble his whole life. He talked about Tyler's neighborhood, describing it as a place where violence was common and young men often turned to crime. Every word felt like a punch to Tyler's stomach. "The evidence will show," Williams continued, "that on the night of March 15th, Tyler Chen approached Blake Morrison outside the Sunset Club and attacked him without provocation. This was not self-defense. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate assault that left a young man injured and traumatized." Peterson's opening statement was brief and uninspiring. He stood up, adjusted his tie nervously, and spoke for less than 5 minutes. "My client is innocent," he said simply. "The prosecution's case is built on assumptions and incomplete evidence. We ask that you keep an open mind." Tyler felt his heart sink. That was it? That was his defense? Then the prosecution began calling their witnesses, and Tyler watched his world fall apart, piece by piece. Blake Morrison took the stand first. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than Tyler's family spent on clothes in a year. His arm was still in a sling, and he walked with a slight limp that made the jury lean forward with sympathy. Blake's testimony was devastating. He described the attack in vivid detail, his voice shaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "I was just leaving the club when this guy came out of nowhere," Blake said, pointing directly at Tyler. "He started yelling at me, saying I thought I was better than him. Then he just started hitting me." Tyler wanted to jump up and scream that it wasn't true, but Peterson had warned him to stay quiet. He watched Blake's performance, and Tyler was convinced it was a performance. With growing frustration, Blake described injuries that seemed worse than what Tyler had seen that night. He talked about ongoing pain and nightmares that kept him awake. "I don't understand why he did it," Blake said, wiping his eyes with a tissue. "I'd never seen him before in my life. I guess he just saw an easy target." When Peterson got his chance to cross-examine Blake, Tyler hoped things would improve. But Peterson's questions were weak and unfocused. He asked about Blake's drinking that night, but Blake calmly admitted he'd had a couple of beers and said it hadn't affected his memory. Peterson asked about the lighting in the alley, but Blake insisted he could see perfectly well. "No further questions," Peterson said after just 10 minutes. Tyler couldn't believe it. There were so many things Peterson hadn't asked about, so many details that didn't add up. Next came Blake's friends who had been with him that night. There were 3 of them: Austin, Drew, and Kevin. They all told basically the same story, backing up Blake's version of events. They described Tyler as aggressive and unprovoked in his attack. Austin claimed he had tried to intervene, but that Tyler had threatened him too. Drew said he had called 911 immediately after the attack. Kevin testified that he had seen Tyler running away after Blake fell to the ground, but Tyler noticed something as he listened to their testimony. The details were almost too perfect, too rehearsed. When Peterson asked them questions, they all gave similar answers, using almost the same words. It was as if they had practiced their story. Tyler started taking notes, writing down every inconsistency he noticed. Austin said the attack happened at 11:30, but Drew said it was closer to midnight. Kevin claimed Tyler was wearing a dark jacket, but the police report said Tyler was found wearing a light-colored shirt. These might seem like small details, but Tyler was learning that small details could be important in court. The medical examiner testified next, describing Blake's injuries in clinical terms. He had suffered a broken arm, several bruises, and cuts that required stitches. The injuries were real. Tyler could see the photos the prosecutor showed to the jury. But something about the doctor's testimony bothered Tyler, though he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Peterson barely cross-examined the medical examiner at all. "No questions, Your Honor," he said, and Tyler felt another wave of despair wash over him. The police officers who had arrested Tyler testified about finding him near the scene. Officer Rodriguez described Tyler as nervous and evasive when questioned. Officer Park said Tyler had seemed guilty and scared when they put him in handcuffs. Tyler remembered that night differently. He had been confused and shocked, trying to explain that he had been trying to help Blake, not hurt him. But apparently his shock had been interpreted as guilt. By the end of the first day, Tyler felt like he was drowning. Every witness had made him look guilty. Every piece of evidence seemed to point to him as the attacker. The jury looked at him with expressions ranging from disgust to pity, but none of them looked like they believed he might be innocent. That evening, Tyler met with Peterson in a small conference room at the courthouse. The lawyer looked tired and defeated, and they hadn't even finished the prosecution's case yet. "Look, Tyler," Peterson said, shuffling through his papers, "I think we need to seriously consider that plea deal. The prosecution is offering 7 years with possibility of parole in 4. Given what we've heard today, that might be the best we can do." Tyler stared at him in disbelief. "But I didn't do it," he said. "I was trying to help Blake, not hurt him." Peterson sighed. "I believe you, kid, I really do. But believing you and proving it to a jury are 2 different things. These people have money, connections, and credibility. You're fighting an uphill battle here." Tyler left the courthouse that night feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. His mom was waiting for him at home with dinner, but he couldn't eat. He just sat at the kitchen table staring at his plate while she tried to comfort him. "Maybe Mr. Peterson is right," she said gently. "Maybe 7 years is better than taking the risk of getting more." But Tyler couldn't accept that. 7 years would destroy everything he had worked for. 7 years would mean his mom would have to struggle alone while he sat in prison for something he didn't do. 7 years would mean giving up on every dream he had ever had. That night, Tyler spread his law books across his bedroom floor and started reading with a desperation he had never felt before. He had 2 days before the trial resumed, and he needed to figure out something, anything, that could help his case. As he read through case studies and legal precedents, Tyler began to see patterns. He started to understand how evidence worked, how witness testimony could be challenged, and how even the strongest cases could have weaknesses. But most importantly, Tyler realized something that changed everything. He didn't have to just sit there and let this happen to him. There was something he could do, something that would shock everyone in that courtroom. Tyler had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. But at this point, he had nothing left to lose. Tyler barely slept the night before court resumed. He had spent hours going over legal documents, highlighting passages and making notes in the margins of every book he could find. His bedroom looked like a hurricane had hit a law library. By morning, he had made a decision that would either save him or destroy any chance he had left. When Tyler walked into the courtroom that morning, he felt different. The scared teenager who had sat silently for 2 days was gone. In his place was someone who had spent every waking hour for the past few months learning how to fight back. He carried a manila folder thick with notes and documents he had printed at the library. Peterson looked surprised when Tyler sat down beside him. "You look like you didn't sleep," the lawyer said. "Listen, I talked to the prosecutor this morning. They're willing to drop it to 5 years if you plead guilty today." "That's a good deal, Tyler. I really think you should take it." Tyler looked at his lawyer for a long moment. Peterson meant well, but he was tired and overwhelmed. He had given up on Tyler's case before it even started. "Mr. Peterson," Tyler said quietly, "I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." Peterson nodded, though he looked confused. "If you had to rate your preparation for this case on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give yourself?" Peterson's face flushed red. He knew he hadn't done the work necessary to properly defend Tyler. He had been hoping for a plea deal from the beginning. "Tyler, I've done the best I can with the time I have. I've got 30 other cases." "I know," Tyler interrupted. "And that's why I'm going to do something that might sound crazy." Tyler took a deep breath. "I want to represent myself." Peterson stared at him like he had just announced he planned to fly to the moon. "Tyler, you can't be serious. You're 19 years old. You have no legal training. This isn't a traffic ticket. This is a felony that could send you to prison for decades." "I've been studying," Tyler said simply, "every night for 3 months. I know this case better than anyone in this room." Peterson looked around nervously. "Look, I know you're frustrated, but representing yourself is almost always a mistake. There's a saying in law, a person who represents himself has a fool for a client." Tyler understood Peterson's concern, but he also understood something Peterson didn't. This wasn't just about legal knowledge, it was about caring. Peterson had 30 other cases to worry about. Tyler only had one, his own life. When Judge Harrison called the court to order, Tyler made his move. He stood up while Peterson was still organizing his papers. "Your Honor," Tyler said, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "I would like to dismiss my current counsel and represent myself." The courtroom erupted. People in the gallery started whispering loudly. The prosecutor looked shocked. Peterson grabbed Tyler's arm and tried to pull him back down into his seat. But Judge Harrison banged her gavel and called for order. "Mr. Chen," the judge said, her voice stern, "this is a very serious decision. Do you understand that you would be giving up your right to professional legal representation?" "Yes, Your Honor, I do." "And do you understand that the court will not give you any special treatment or extra time because you choose to represent yourself?" "I understand, Your Honor." Judge Harrison studied Tyler for a long moment. She had seen defendants try to represent themselves before, and it usually ended badly. But there was something different about this young man. He wasn't acting out of anger or desperation. He seemed calm and prepared. "Mr. Peterson," the judge said, "does your client understand the implications of this decision?" Peterson stood up reluctantly. "Your Honor, I've advised my client against this course of action, but he seems determined to proceed." Judge Harrison looked back at Tyler. "Very well. Mr. Chen, you are now representing yourself. I strongly advise you to reconsider, but if you're determined to proceed, we'll continue with the trial." Tyler felt a mixture of terror and relief as Peterson gathered his papers and left the defense table. Now it was just Tyler, sitting alone, facing a prosecutor with 20 years of experience and the backing of the entire district attorney's office. District Attorney Williams looked almost amused. He probably thought this would make his job even easier. A teenager with no legal training trying to defend himself against serious criminal charges. It would be like a professional boxer fighting a child. But Tyler had prepared for this moment. He opened his manila folder and spread his notes across the defense table, organizing them the way he had seen real lawyers do it. He had a plan, and he was ready to put it into action. The prosecution continued with their case, calling more witnesses to testify against Tyler. But now, instead of sitting silently while Peterson failed to challenge their testimony, Tyler was taking detailed notes and preparing for his chance to cross-examine. Officer Martinez took the stand to testify about the crime scene investigation. Williams walked him through the standard questions about evidence collection and witness interviews. Everything seemed routine until Tyler stood up for his cross-examination. "Officer Martinez," Tyler began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "How long have you been investigating crimes like this?" "About 12 years, Martinez replied. "And in those 12 years, how many assault cases have you investigated where the attacker stayed at the scene to help the victim?" Williams jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor, relevance." Tyler was ready for this. "Your Honor, the prosecution has painted my client as someone who attacked Mr. Morrison and then fled. I believe it's relevant to establish what actually happened that night." Judge Harrison considered this. "Overruled. The witness may answer." Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable. Well, that would be unusual." "Unusual how?" Tyler pressed. "Would you say it would be almost unheard of for an attacker to remain at the scene and attempt to provide aid to their victim?" "Yes, that would be very unusual." Tyler had scored his first point and he could see the jury taking notice. But he was just getting started. "Officer Martinez, when you arrived at the scene, was I fleeing?" "No, you were kneeling beside the victim." "And what was I doing?" "You appeared to be checking on his condition." "Did I have any weapons on me?" "No." "Did I resist arrest?" "No, you cooperated fully." Tyler could see Williams shifting uncomfortably in his seat. These were questions Peterson should have asked days ago, but Tyler was asking them now. "Officer Martinez, in your 12 years of experience, does my behavior that night seem consistent with someone who had just committed a violent assault?" Williams objected again, but Judge Harrison allowed the question. Officer Martinez hesitated before answering. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." Tyler sat down, feeling a surge of confidence. He had just undermined a key part of the prosecution's narrative, and he had done it using only logic and careful questioning. But the real test was coming. Blake Morrison would take the stand again for additional testimony, and Tyler would have his chance to cross-examine the person who had accused him. Tyler looked at his notes one more time, reviewing the inconsistencies he had noticed and the questions he planned to ask. The courtroom was completely silent as Blake was sworn in again. Williams asked him a few follow-up questions about his ongoing recovery and the impact the attack had on his life. Blake's answers were polished and sympathetic. Then it was Tyler's turn. He stood up, his heart pounding, and walked toward the witness stand. This was the moment that would determine his future. Blake Morrison looked confident, probably thinking that a teenager with no legal training would be easy to handle. Blake had no idea what Tyler had discovered during his months of research. And he definitely had no idea what Tyler was about to ask him. "Mr. Morrison," Tyler began, "you testified that you had never seen me before the night of this alleged attack. Is that correct?" "That's right. And you said I approached you without any provocation." "Yes." Tyler walked over to the defense table and picked up a document. "Mr. Morrison, are you familiar with the Riverside Community Center?" Blake's confident expression flickered for just a moment. Why would that matter?" "Please just answer the question. Are you familiar with the Riverside Community Center?" "I may have heard of it." Tyler held up the document. "This is a volunteer schedule from the Riverside Community Center. It shows that both you and I volunteered there last summer, working on the same project for 3 weeks. Do you remember that now?" The courtroom was dead silent. Blake's face had gone pale, and Williams was frantically shuffling through his papers, clearly caught off guard. I volunteer at a lot of places," Blake stammered. "I can't remember everyone I meet, but Tyler wasn't done. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and he was about to show everyone in that courtroom exactly what he had learned. Tyler could see the sweat beading on Blake's forehead as he continued his cross-examination. The confident young man who had testified so smoothly before was now fidgeting in his seat, and the jury was taking notice. "Mr. Morrison," Tyler continued, "during those 3 weeks at the community center, did we ever have any conflicts or disagreements?" Blake shifted uncomfortably. "I told you I don't remember working with you." Tyler walked back to his table and picked up another document. "This is a photo from the community center's newsletter last August. Would you like me to show it to the jury?" Williams stood up quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. This document hasn't been properly introduced into evidence." Tyler was ready for this too. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce this document as Defense Exhibit A. I have copies for the court and opposing counsel." Judge Harrison examined the photo and nodded. "Admitted." Tyler handed copies to the jury, and several of them studied the image carefully. It clearly showed Tyler and Blake working together on a construction project, both smiling at the camera. "Mr. Morrison," Tyler said, "does this refresh your memory about our previous interaction?" Blake stared at the photo, and Tyler could see him calculating his options. "Okay, maybe we did work together, but that doesn't change what happened that night." "Actually, it does," Tyler said calmly, "because it means you lied under oath when you said you'd never seen me before." "Why would you lie about that?" "I wasn't lying," Blake protested. "I just forgot." Tyler nodded as if he understood, but he was setting up his next move. "Let's talk about your injuries, Mr. Morrison. You testified that I punched you multiple times, correct?" "Yes. And you said I knocked you to the ground?" "That's right." Tyler picked up the medical report and studied it carefully. "According to the medical examiner's report, you suffered a broken arm, correct?" "Yes." "And where exactly was this break located?" Blake looked confused by the question. It was my left arm." "I understand that, but where on your left arm?" "The report is very specific about this." Blake hesitated. "I don't remember the exact medical terms." Tyler read from the report. "The fracture was located on the posterior aspect of the left ulna, consistent with what medical professionals call a fall fracture. Are you familiar with that term?" Williams objected, claiming Tyler wasn't qualified to interpret medical testimony, but Judge Harrison allowed the question. "No, I'm not familiar with medical terms," Blake answered. "Well, let me explain," Tyler said, turning to face the jury. "A fall fracture occurs when someone falls backwards and puts their arm out to break the fall. The force of hitting the ground causes this specific type of break." Tyler looked back at Blake. "Mr. Morrison, this type of fracture is almost impossible to cause by punching someone. Did you actually fall that night?" When you attacked me, I fell down." "But Mr. Morrison, your friends testified that I punched you and you immediately fell. But your injury pattern suggests you fell backwards onto concrete. If I had been punching you, wouldn't you have fallen forward?" Blake was clearly struggling now. "I don't know. Everything happened so fast." Tyler wasn't finished. He had spent hours studying the medical report and researching the type of injuries Blake had sustained. "Mr. Morrison, the medical report also notes that you had alcohol in your system that night. How much did you drink?" "Just a couple of beers, like I said before." Tyler pulled out another document. "This is your blood test from that night. Your blood alcohol level was 12, which is well above the legal limit for driving. That's more than a couple of beers, isn't it?" Blake's lawyer training was apparently kicking in because he was being more careful now. "I may have had more to drink than I initially remembered." "Mr. Morrison, at that level of intoxication, isn't it possible that you simply fell down the stairs outside the club and injured yourself?" "No, that's not what happened." Tyler walked over to his table and picked up what looked like a security camera image. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Defense Exhibit B." Williams was on his feet immediately. "Objection. This evidence wasn't disclosed during discovery." Tyler looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I obtained this evidence through a public records request just yesterday. The prosecution had access to the same public records and chose not to investigate them." Judge Harrison looked at the image. "Where did this come from, Mr. Chen?" "From a security camera at the building next to the club. Your Honor, the footage shows the exterior staircase where the incident occurred." The judge studied the image carefully, then allowed it to be admitted. Tyler handed copies to the jury, and their reactions were immediate. Several jurors leaned forward to get a better look. "Mr. Morrison," Tyler said, This image shows someone falling down a flight of concrete stairs at 11:47 p.m. on the night in question. Do you recognize the person in this image? Blake stared at the photo, his face now completely pale. It's hard to tell from that angle. Mr. Morrison, are you wearing the same clothes in this image that you wore to court yesterday when you identified them for the jury? Blake couldn't deny it. He was clearly visible in the security image, falling down the stairs outside the club. There was no one else around him. Mr. Morrison, Tyler continued, why didn't you tell the police that you fell down the stairs? Because that's not what happened. Tyler looked at the jury, then back at Blake. Mr. Morrison, isn't it true that you were embarrassed about falling downstairs while intoxicated, so you decided to blame someone else? No, that's not true. Isn't it true that when you saw me trying to help you, you realized you could use me as a scapegoat for your own accident? Williams was objecting repeatedly now, but Tyler was on a roll. He had spent months preparing for this moment, and everything was falling into place. Mr. Morrison, Tyler said, have you ever been arrested before? Williams objected, but Tyler argued that it was relevant to the witness's credibility. Judge Harrison allowed the question. Blake hesitated. That's not relevant. Please answer the question. Have you ever been arrested? Yes, but the charges were dropped. Tyler pulled out yet another document. According to public records, you were arrested last year for filing a false police report. Isn't that correct? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even Judge Harrison looked surprised. Williams was frantically trying to object, but the damage was done. That was a misunderstanding, Blake protested. A misunderstanding where you accused someone else of a crime they didn't commit, just like you're doing now. Blake was falling apart on the witness stand. His story was crumbling, and everyone in the courtroom could see it. Tyler had systematically destroyed the prosecution's case using nothing but careful research and logical questioning. But Tyler had one more surprise. He walked back to his table and picked up a cell phone. Mr. Morrison, is this your phone? Blake looked confused. How did you get my phone? I didn't. This is my phone, but it contains something very interesting. Tyler looked at Judge Harrison. Your Honor, I'd like to play an audio recording for the court. Williams was practically shouting his objections now, but Tyler explained that he had legally recorded a conversation in a public place where there was no expectation of privacy. Judge Harrison allowed the recording to be played, and Tyler connected his phone to the courtroom's audio system. Blake's voice filled the room, clear as day. The recording was from 2 weeks ago when Tyler had gone to the coffee shop where Blake worked part-time. Blake hadn't seen Tyler, but Tyler had heard Blake talking to a friend about the case. I can't believe how easy this is, Blake's recorded voice said. My dad's connections are making sure this goes smoothly. The prosecutor is eating out of my hand. That kid doesn't stand a chance. The courtroom was dead silent as Blake's own words condemned him. On the recording, Blake laughed about how Tyler was the perfect patsy and how his father had promised to take care of everything. Blake's face had gone from pale to green. He looked like he might be sick right there on the witness stand. Mr. Morrison, Tyler said quietly, would you like to change your testimony? Blake looked around the courtroom desperately, but there was nowhere to run. His own words had destroyed any credibility he had left. The jury was staring at him with expressions of disgust and anger. I need to speak with my lawyer, Blake stammered. Tyler sat down, feeling exhausted but victorious. He had just dismantled the prosecution's entire case using nothing but thorough preparation and careful investigation. But he wasn't done yet. He still had to present his own case and prove not just that Blake was lying, but that Tyler was innocent. The best part was still to come. The courtroom remained silent for several moments after Blake's devastating testimony. Judge Harrison called for a 15-minute recess, and Tyler could see the jury members talking quietly among themselves as they filed out. Their expressions had completely changed from the beginning of the trial. District Attorney Williams looked like he had aged 10 years in the past hour. His assistant was frantically whispering in his ear, probably advising him to cut his losses. The case that had seemed like a sure victory was now falling apart in spectacular fashion. When court resumed, Tyler stood up to present his defense case. He had spent so much energy destroying the prosecution's case that he almost felt anticlimactic, but he knew he needed to seal his victory by presenting the truth about what really happened that night. Your Honor, Tyler said, I'd like to call my first witness. Tyler had learned that in criminal cases, defendants rarely testified on their own behalf because it opened them up to cross-examination about their past. But Tyler had a clean record and nothing to hide. More importantly, he was the only person who could tell the jury what really happened that night. "I call Tyler Chen to the stand," he announced. There was a murmur through the courtroom. It was unusual enough for a defendant to represent himself, but testifying on his own behalf was almost unheard of. Judge Harrison looked surprised but allowed it. Tyler walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. It felt strange to be questioning himself, but he had practiced this in his bedroom dozens of times. "State your name for the record," Tyler said to himself, then realized how ridiculous that sounded. Judge Harrison almost smiled as she instructed Tyler on the proper way to present his own testimony. Tyler told his story simply and truthfully. He described leaving work that night, hearing sounds of distress from the alley and finding Blake injured on the ground. He explained how he had tried to help, checking Blake's pulse and attempting to keep him conscious until help arrived. "When the police arrived," Tyler testified, "I was relieved. I thought they were there to help Blake. I never imagined I would be accused of hurting him." Tyler's testimony was straightforward and believable. Unlike Blake's polished performance, Tyler spoke like a regular person telling the truth. He didn't try to embellish or make himself look like a hero. He just explained what happened. When Tyler finished his testimony, William stood up for cross-examination. But what could he ask? Tyler had already admitted to being at the scene. The prosecution's entire case had been based on Blake's credibility, and that was now destroyed. Williams asked a few half-hearted questions about Tyler's background and his decision to help Blake, but Tyler answered everything honestly and completely. Williams sat down after just 10 minutes, clearly defeated. Tyler's next witness was Mrs. Chen, the librarian who had helped him with his legal research. Tyler had asked her to testify not about the case itself, but about his character. "I've watched Tyler study in our library almost every evening for the past 3 months," Mrs. Chen testified. "He's dedicated, respectful, and genuinely concerned about learning. He's exactly the kind of young person who would stop to help someone in trouble." Tyler also called his construction foreman, Mr. Rodriguez, who testified about Tyler's work ethic and integrity. "Tyler's the kind of kid who stays late to help clean up, even when he's not getting paid for it," Rodriguez said. "He's not violent. He's not a troublemaker. He's just a good kid trying to build a better life." But Tyler's most powerful witness was someone he hadn't planned to call until that morning. Blake's own mother, Patricia Morrison, had contacted Tyler's family the night before. She wanted to testify. Mrs. Morrison took the stand looking nervous but determined. Tyler could see Blake shifting uncomfortably in the gallery where he was now sitting. "Mrs. Morrison," Tyler said gently, "how long have you known about your son's drinking problem?" Williams objected, but Judge Harrison overruled him. This was relevant to Blake's credibility and his condition that night. "Blake has been struggling with alcohol for about 2 years," Mrs. Morrison said quietly. "We've tried to get him help, but he refuses to admit he has a problem. Has he ever lied to cover up incidents related to his drinking?" Mrs. Morrison looked at her son, and Tyler could see the pain in her eyes. "Yes. Last year he crashed his car into a neighbor's fence while drunk, but he told the police that someone had hit him and driven away. That's what led to the false report charge." Tyler felt bad for Mrs. Morrison, but he needed her testimony to establish the pattern of Blake's behavior. "Mrs. Morrison, in your opinion, is it possible that Blake fell down those stairs while intoxicated and then blamed someone else to avoid responsibility?" Mrs. Morrison started crying softly. "Yes," she whispered. "I think that's exactly what happened." Tyler's final witness was Dr. Patricia Wong, an emergency room physician he had contacted after studying Blake's medical records. Dr. Wong explained the nature of Blake's injuries in detail. "These injuries are completely consistent with a fall down concrete stairs," Dr. Wong testified. "The fracture pattern, the location of the bruises, even the cuts on his hands. Everything suggests he fell backwards and tried to break his fall with his hands." "Doctor," Tyler asked, "if someone had been punched repeatedly, as Mr. Morrison claimed, would we expect to see different types of injuries?" "Absolutely. Punch injuries create different fracture patterns and bruising. These injuries were not caused by being punched." Williams tried to challenge Dr. Wong's testimony, but she was unshakable. She had 20 years of experience treating assault victims, and she was certain about her conclusions. When Tyler finished presenting his case, the courtroom felt completely different than it had just a few days earlier. The jury was looking at Tyler with respect instead of suspicion. Blake had left the courtroom entirely, unable to face the consequences of his lies. Williams gave a brief closing argument, but his heart wasn't in it. How could he ask the jury to convict Tyler when his own star witness had been caught lying under oath? Tyler's closing argument was simple but powerful. 3 months ago, I was just a construction worker trying to save money for college. I had never been in trouble with the law. I had no reason to attack Blake Morrison. But I did have every reason to help someone who was hurt. Tyler walked over to the jury box and looked at each juror. Blake Morrison lied to you. He lied to the police. He lied to his own family. He tried to destroy my life to cover up his own mistakes. But the truth has a way of coming out, especially when you're willing to fight for it. Tyler paused and looked around the courtroom. I didn't just represent myself in this trial because I couldn't afford a better lawyer. I represented myself because no one else was going to fight as hard for my innocence as I was. This case was never about the law. It was about justice. And justice means not letting an innocent person go to prison for someone else's lies. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the foreman stood up and announced their verdict. Not guilty on all charges. Tyler felt his knees almost give out with relief. His mother, who had been sitting in the front row every day of the trial, started crying tears of joy. Even Judge Harrison looked pleased with the outcome. But the story didn't end with the verdict. Within a week, Blake Morrison was charged with perjury and filing a false police report. The 3 friends who had lied to support his story were also charged. Blake's father, City Councilman Morrison, resigned in disgrace when it came out that he had tried to influence the prosecution. Tyler's story spread quickly through social media and local news. A teenager who had taught himself law and successfully defended himself against serious criminal charges was exactly the kind of story people love to share. Within a month, Tyler received scholarship offers from 3 different law schools. A prominent civil rights attorney offered him a job as a paralegal while he completed his undergraduate degree. The same courthouse where he had nearly been convicted now displays a plaque about the importance of self-representation and equal access to justice. Tyler enrolled in community college that fall, majoring in pre-law. He continued working construction part-time, but now he also volunteered at a legal aid clinic, helping other people who couldn't afford attorneys. 2 years later, Tyler was accepted to law school with a full scholarship. He specialized in criminal defense, focusing on representing people who reminded him of himself, those whom the system had written off before they even got a chance to tell their story. Tyler kept a copy of his trial transcript on his desk, not as a trophy but as a reminder of what's possible when someone refuses to give up. He had learned that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room belongs to the person everyone expects to stay silent. During his graduation from law school, Tyler gave a speech about his experience. Justice isn't about having the most expensive lawyer or the best connections, he said. Justice is about truth, and truth doesn't care about your background or your bank account. It only cares about whether you're willing to fight for it. Today, Tyler Chen is a successful defense attorney who has never forgotten where he came from. He takes on cases that other lawyers won't touch, representing clients who can't afford to pay much but deserve someone who will fight as hard for their freedom as Tyler fought for his own. And every time Tyler walks into a courtroom, he remembers that scared 19-year-old kid who decided to bet everything on the truth. It turned out to be the best decision he ever made.